first meeting of our new fiscal year, and we encourage you who might not have renewed your membership or have not become members yet to join. That's what's taken a little bit of time, in that our treasurers, Shar and Lori, are taking membership. So before you leave, I'm sure they'll be glad to accept some membership money. I have this picture up because the topic of the program tonight is the historic buildings that Glenn and Doreen and the early members of the Historical Society acquired and moved out to the gold camp. This is one of the buildings. If you were here prior to, I think it was about 1962 or thereabouts, this building was in Rosamond, and it was moved out to the gold camp. It was one of the early ones that was moved out there, I believe. Glenn and Doreen had a dream of building out at the base of the mine an area with old historic buildings. They wanted a museum, and they actually had it for some time. Did any of you ever visit out there when they were in operation? Yes. Good. Okay, I know I took a tour of the mine way back when I had my 5-year-old nephew, who's now almost 60, here. But anyway, these buildings have enormous history. This one is the one called the Stuckey Kenton Dudley House. It was built in the 1800s by John Stuckey. His niece, whose last name was Kenton, ran this as a boarding house. That's where the mail was delivered. She was actually listed as a postmistress. And this was on Sierra Highway, south of where the Hamilton Hotel is. It was a corner or two down. And I have to confess, I've lived in this town for a long time, and I do not know the names of the streets in Rosamond. But this, I think, is Ella Kenton. The remains of this house is at the gold camp. Glenn will talk about it. He will comment that they had trouble keeping the front of the building on, and so the front has been off for a long time out of the gold camp. It's when you see Glenn being interviewed, he's on the side of the building. The video that we're going to show, oh, there's another building also, just a second. This building is also out there, and I just happened to have gotten a bunch of newspaper clippings from the daughter of Noel Dees about a month ago. She sent me a package of things, and this is the article showing that building, and it talks about that this building just arrived out there, so this had to have been back in the 60s, although there's no date on this, if anybody wants to read it. This building and another building, this one was from Palmdale, and Glenn, I believe, will talk about this building also in the video. Now, we owe this video to Jed Dyke, who is sitting in the back of the room currently. If we didn't have Jed's foresight to interview Glenn and record something, this information would be gone. So we owe Glenn, or Jed, a huge round of applause for taking the time to do this. Now, he talked to Glenn for 2 days, which made quite a bit of footage. This has been edited down because we didn't have the time for you to sit here and to play both of the raw videos. But we have picked out what we thought would be enough to give you some interest. You know, it's kind of sad that those buildings are out there deteriorating. You'll notice that when this was filmed in 2001, they were already deteriorating. Well, it's even worse now. And they've had some trouble out there keeping vandals away. So, unfortunately, people don't respect private property. That is private property out there. And, you know, even though the buildings are falling down, we don't want them vandalized. So hopefully people will respect them. But you'll have a little bit of information, hopefully, now with the video. So Mac, are you ready? Okay. Do I have to do anything? Okay. I will. I'll put the lights. Is that going to be good, you think? Sure. Or do you want all the lights off?
Oh, it looks good now.
That's good.
Is that, you in the back, is that okay? Because you have the lighting. Okay.
Yeah, fine.
He's actually at the Gold Camp, not his old mine.
Jed Dykes and I are doing a little history on these old buildings here in Gold Camp. The date's Friday, August the 9th, 2001, and we're going to tell you a little bit about what each one of these old buildings, where they came from and when they were moved here. This old Pondale Railroad section house, of course, is important to me because I was born here in 1911. My father went to work for the railroad, Southern Pacific Railroad in Santa Paula shortly after he was married to my mother, Marion Allen, in Santa Paula in 1900. They were married. And he worked around for the Southern Pacific around Santa Paula and Fillmore and Piru. We lived in Piru a while. Then we moved to Pondale here in about 1909. And we moved into this old building. As far as I know the history on it, when the railroad came through in 1876, at first the railroad workers that were working on the track, the section people, lived in boxcars which were on rails on the train. But about 1880 they decided they should have more permanent quarters, and they built this old building and some building next to it for the Mexican laborers to live in. And my dad had been worked up from a track worker around the Piru Santa Paula area. Now he was a section foreman. In case a section foreman, you're wondering what they did. They were the ones to keep sure that the tracks and the ties and everything were in good shape for the many passenger trains they had then and the freights, so they wouldn't derail. So they had an important job making sure that the rails and everything were in good shape. So my dad every day would have to go out, when I stopped to think, he worked for Southern Pacific Railroad about 40 years. He'd have to go out on that old hot rails every day with his Mexican gang and make sure that the rails were all in good shape. So we moved here about 1909 to Pondale. And I think about that time, Pondale probably had about 350 people. And almost all the employment then was by the Southern Pacific Railroad. The main reason it was an important stop was they had many of the engines and the engineers and the helpers, as we call them, which would help the freight trains up over the hill to Vincent. Then they had a Y there at Vincent where they could turn around and come back to Pondale. So this old building is where I came into. When we moved there was my mother and father and the 5 settled children in the picture so far. And I was the 6th child born in 1911, September 28th. So they did have a doctor in Pondale that time, so I do have a doctor's name on my birth certificate. It was in Lancaster, like where my good friend Glenn Rouse and a lot of them were born. They were born in this world by Mom Everett, who was a house mother that brought many of them into the world. But they must have had a doctor in Pondale, because I noticed on my birth certificate it was signed by a doctor. So when I was born there in 1911, we lived there until about 1919 or 20, when some of the kids started getting to be of high school age. And at Antelope Valley High School at that time was the only high school between San Fernando and Bakersfield. So any kid that wanted to go to high school had to go to the Antelope Valley High School in Lancaster. Well, that was the reason we moved to Lancaster, so the kids could be closer to the high school. And in fact, 7 of the settled children graduated from Antelope Valley High School from the period of starting in about 23 up until, well, the last one was after World War II. Jack, my youngest brother, graduated, I think, 1945. Well, some of the things I remember about this old building, in about 1918 or 1919, the first airplanes were landing in Pondale, and the old Pondale baseball field was about 2 blocks in front of our house. And the airplanes, the old Jenny airplanes, the biplanes were to land on that field there, and it was a big excitement for the city of Pondale, because everybody in the whole surrounding area had to see these newfangled flying machines. And so as far as I know, they were the first ones to land in that area anyway. So the main reason they were landing there, they were flying from Bakersfield, Los Angeles, and they had to refuel. So sure enough, they came in that day, and it was big excitement. Everybody dashing over to the baseball field to see those new thing in life, the airplane. So that was an exciting day. But that same day, just before these airplanes had landed, the Mexican quarters next to us had burned down a few weeks before, and they were rebuilding it. Fortunately, it didn't destroy this house. And as far as I know, this house was built in about 1880, what I could find out in the railroad. And actually, as you can see, it's not too bad a shape. And the main reason for that is that the railroad had a crew that came in every year and worked on it and kept it up. Getting back to that day of the airplane landing, my brother and I were having a race over on the form of the new buildings, and I fell and cut my eye on one of the 4x4s, and they had to call a doctor, and then they had me strapped down there cutting up my eye when those airplanes landed. The doctor said he had to finish the job in a hurry, so I still have a scar over my right eye there. I think he sewed me up in a hurry to get rid of me. But anyway, it seemed to work out all right. And the other thing was exciting about, that's probably one reason I became so interested in sports. The Pondale baseball field was right out in front of us, and I was the bat boy for the Pondale baseball team. And I got to go to, where they played all over the desert, like at Randsburg and Mojave and Tehachapi. And I remember one thing was quite a thrill for me when we would go to Tehachapi. We would stop at Mojave at the Harvey House. The Harvey House is where they would take the passengers off the train and feed them, because they didn't have diners on the train. And the Harvey House in Mojave at that time was a 2-story building, and the helpers and the workers stayed upstairs, and the restaurant and the station agents, everything was downstairs. So it was quite a thrill as a young little old boy from Pondale eating at Harvey House, because they had fancy table settings. They had linen napkins and silverware and all things like that. So I remember it quite a thrill to eat in the Harvey House. So my job with the Pondale baseball team, they actually only had about 3 baseballs. So when there's a foul ball, sometimes all 3 of them would be out in the brush there, and 'cause we didn't have to stop the game until we found the ball so they could continue. So actually, as soon as the foul ball was hit, I was supposed to take off and find it and try to retrieve it and bring it back. So, of course, they thought I always thought that was an important job, but I guess it was, kept the game going. Well, Jed and I are continuing our tour of Gold Camp to the old buildings that are still left here as of this month, which is November 19th or 2001. And the next three buildings are kind of interesting old buildings, and they have a lot of history. This building that I'm sitting on the porch of here was the superintendent's house of the Mud Mining Company. And the Mud Mining Company was located on the north side of Soledad Mountain. And I think they were in operation from around the 1880s something till the 1900 period. And I wrote to the mud people and tried to get more information, but they didn't have much on this part of their operation. They're the ones that started the cactus mining operation over in the Middle Buttes, and they became well known when they found that big copper deposit in the Isle of Cyprus. So anyway, these next three old buildings were part of their operation. And this one here, the superintendent's house, you'll notice with the living quarter that gets to the superintendent. In those days, they didn't have air conditioners or coolers, so they had porches that usually ran clear around the building. So as the sun moved different times of the day, they could move around and still be in the shade. Now this old building itself has been, many of you seen this because I bet it's been in at least 25 commercials or movie television shows. And the one I remember, this was supposed to be an Outback building in Australia, and MasterCard made a commercial here. And while they were filming here, they had sheep running all around out in there, and I have a good picture of it when they had it all fixed up for location. But one interesting thing had happened while they were filming here, they brought in, for this commercial, they didn't use them here, but they needed 2 kangaroos. So they had them in a truck while they were filming here. But they went over on the west side of the valley here and turned them loose. One of them got away, and it took them a whole day to catch that kangaroo. You can imagine some desert driller driving down the road and seeing that big kangaroo come off along and say, "Man, those Antelope Valley jackrabbits are bigger than ever." Anyway, this old building, many of you have seen it in the MasterCard commercial for the Outback of Australia, and I think Rockwell and IBM, and some of the things I can think that were filmed there in different commercials. And they like the inside of it. Eventually Jed and I'll go inside. And actually, it had a fancy trim. You can see around. I think, as usual, the vandals are very rough on these old buildings. In fact, I see they've kicked all the Jed and I'll go inside and see what it looks like now. When we had the Gold Camp, we had this fixed up like one of the mine, like it would be the mine superintendent's house. And we had some real old furniture, and some of it came from San Francisco. And the man that owned the furniture, the story was that he was hung by the vigilantes up there, so he must not have been a very good man. Well, Jed and I are continuing our tour of the old historic building in Gold Camp. And the one in front of us here right now played an important part in the history of Antelope Valley. First, going back to, again, the 1885 to 1900 period, it was the boarding house for the mud mining camp, which was on Soledad Mountain. And the miners would come here and have their meals. And we moved this in the back, there was an old brick oven. But of course, Louis Arabica, who was a house mover in Roseland, moved these old buildings for us. And we put in the big old long steel and hoisted up on the steel. That big old heavy oven just went right through, and it's still probably up there on Solid Mountain. So we're able to move that. But one thing was kind of interesting, I'll show you here. I don't know if Jed can see this or not, but in the back there, there's a one building, part of the building a little higher than the other. And when he's coming down south that mountain, of course, there's no good roads. And as he hit a couple of rocks, it started splitting apart there. And we weren't sure if it's steel even bent. It's quite a heavy building, as you see. But we weren't sure if we're going to get this old building down there or not. But we finally did. And we knew as soon as we got a building big enough, it'd be nice to have started a historical society here in Antelope Valley. So in about 1959, 58, when we opened up for tours, we moved this building in shortly after that. And we fixed it up. And originally, the seats in here came from the old Officers Club at Muroc. They're all gone now. The seats we use in there now originally were used by Judy Garland's dad at the Lancaster Theater in Lancaster. And when they remodeled that and refurbished it, he gave them to Paul Hubbard, and Paul Hubbard moved them in the old theater at Randsburg. So that's where we got the old seats are in there now. And they were the load seats. They were the better ones. Chad and I'll go in there later and show some of them to you. But anyway, this old building, one story they tell about it, when I was up on Soledad Mountain, you could see the porch was a little high off the ground, and there was a little girl sitting there with her legs dangling down, and she was bitten by a rattlesnake and it killed her. So this old building had a little sad and then some interesting information on it, because it was the boarding house for the mud mining camp, and eventually it became part of the Karma Mining Company, and we obtained it from Bert Wegman and the Wegman family. So when we moved it in there, then we fixed it all up, and we had a couple of old murals on there from the Hollywood racetrack, which were Western scenes, and had the inside fixed, the big old pot-belly stove to eat it. And we got an old bar from an old hotel in Tehachapi, which we had across the back, and the Historical Society served many good refreshments across that bar. Not liquid, but solids. But anyway, we'd have our big Christmas party here and get that old pot-belly stove going. And it seemed like sometime most of the meetings we averaged about when we first started. So we always had a good attendance. But on a cold night, we had a hard time getting away from the old pot-belly stove. So this old building was all fixed up until 1960 or 1980 when we closed down. Then the Historical Society. Another thing was that the meetings, the older people, if nature called, had to just go outside and use one of the tall brushes here. But when they moved to the community building in Roseman, of course, they had the inside plumbing. Things were picking up, and heating was much better. All they had to do was turn on a switch and air conditioning when it got hot. But here, when it got hot, you just open up the doors and windows, and in the winter, when we get that kept adding extra cold. Another little interesting story, we had a big coal bin here. We used to keep the coal in, and we used to get a lot of youth groups when we had the tours in the Los Angeles area. So when they came up here, they'd pick up every little rock and come running with it to me. They thought every rock up here in the hill probably was full of gold, but I had to disappoint them, tell them there wasn't much gold in the rock they found. But they'd eventually find that coal bin and come running up with a piece of coal. What's this? What's this? We'd say, well, we burned that in the stove to keep for heat. Oh, you can't burn that, that's a rock. They'd never seen a piece of coal, the kids from the city. And one little kid said, why don't you just push the switch? I figured that was the easiest way. But anyway, we had a lot of interesting events while we had tours open. We had youth groups from all over, and senior citizens group, and every other group. But as I said before, there never was a profit. I turned around and put everything in keeping these old buildings up, and it was quite a project. But getting back to this building, then, so in 1959, we got the building moved in, got it furnished with chairs and seats and the old pot-belly stove. And we had, in May, was the first meeting of the current Antelope Historical Society, which was held there. And there's quite a story on the Historical Society and their 40-year history in one of their publications called Gold Fever. telling about the various meetings, and we had some very notable speakers come here. Chuck Yeager was one of our speakers one time, and Joe Walker and Coke Wood. We had a lot of big speakers from all over the state. So this building had a lot of interesting tales. And we had many of the old timers tell their story of their experience there in Antelope Valley in the early days. And we had Doreen and I had a tape recorder, and we taped them, and we gave most of those tapes to Norma McCurve at the museum. So she has a lot of the voices like Bertie Weber and Emery Kidd and the Ritters, and a lot of the Joe Walker and Chuck Yeager, and a lot of the old timers. One thing when we had to go camp, we were fortunate being close to originally Muroc Air Base, later became Edwards Air Base when Glenn Edwards was killed in that Northrop bomber flying wing, and they changed it to Edwards Air Base. And we would get many of the X-15 flyers and the notables from Edwards to come over here as our guests and take a tour. So that was thrilling. We had lots of the famous people from Edwards and Armstrong and Aldrin, who'd been on the moon, and different ones, and all the famous X-15 flyers like Joe Walker and Chuck Yeager and Neil Armstrong and many others. And of course they used this for many TV movies. I remember one shot, a television show they shot here, the FBI show, Efren Zimbalist Jr. and John McIntyre, who had made a show called Wagon Train, a series. He lived in this old house over here, and they used a lot of the old buildings there. And as I said, they've been used in many TV shows. But this here was the birthplace of the Historical Society, and they met here for 20 years. And now they meet, let's see, we celebrated our 40th anniversary in 1999. So they're getting up, working up toward the 50th year, and they still meet in the community building in Roseman. So the one thing that was kind of interesting, Doreen always figured, well, we started here, Doreen and I started but we would get one of the old timers to be the president, and that didn't work out. They pulled a fast one on me. They said, well, you're going to be the president. So I was the charter president for the first 3 years, and along the year, Doreen had 2 terms as president of the Historical Society. And this old building, when they had the World Championship Chili Cook-Off, was where they used this for their headquarters, where they'd sign people up and everything. And about a week ahead of time, there'd be truckload after truckload of supplies coming in there, and they'd had that old building full of supplies for the chili cook-off. So almost all the famous VIPs that came to the chili cook-off at one time were in this old miners' hall. So anyway, you had some interesting stories to tell. You think anything I left out, Jed? So anyway, then we'll move over to one more old building in Soledad, the blacksmith shop. As Dykes and I are filming these old buildings in Gold Camp. We started last week and we did about 4, and today we're going to finish the remaining 4 or 5 that are here. This old building that I'm sitting in here, kind of a reddish color, is part of the old Ritter Ranch, which is kind of interesting. There's been a lot of publicity lately about big development on the old Ritter Ranch out toward Leona Valley. Well, this old building, according to Frida Ritter, who married Bud Redmond, she's the one that gave me most of the background on this building. Frida told me that this building was probably built in about 1880s or late 80s or early 90s, and the Ritter family used it for a little bit of everything. You know, they had a big vineyard and had a winery and had wheat and had cattle over there in the Leona Valley area. So this building was used a lot for storage, and Frida told me at times if there's nothing in it on Sunday, they even had church services in there at times. Now, when we moved it up here from Leona Valley to Gold Camp, Louis Zaravica, who moved all these buildings for us, was a house mover in Roseman. But this one was quite easy to move. But as you can tell, the weather's really hard on it because the roof's getting kind of bad. But what we used here at Gold Camp was for our store. People would drive up in the parking lot, and then they would come through here and get their tickets for their mine tours. And while we're waiting for the mine tours, they'd go around and look over all the things that are in these old buildings. So we had a lot of old store fixtures in this old building. And then when we moved in the Kenton Duntley building, which we're going to next, we moved the store from this one to the Kenton Duntley building. So then we just fixed this up like it would be an old store in the old days. We had lots of mining relics in there, mining pans and coal oil lamps and kerosene lanterns and all kinds of old equipment in there. So this, again, if this old building could talk, it could tell us a lot of tales. So this was part of the old Ritter ranks in Leona Valley. It has a lot of history because it was, we call it the Stuckey Kenton Duntley building because they were the three families that lived in here. And it was Roseman's first hotel, post office, and store. Is when you get up into it, it's all partitioned off for different portions. They had 3 rooms on the west side for the hotel rooms, and then the post office was in one room, and the store was in another. And a man by the name of Stuckey built this in the 1880s. He's a retired sheriff, and he moved out here. And it was about 2 blocks south of where Roseman Boulevard is on Sierra Highway. And so Ella Kenton, who came out here for health, was Stuckey's niece. So they lived in it a while, and then Ella's brother, George Kenton, was one of the early cattlemen here. Remember when I had the store in Roseman in the mid-30s, Ella would come up and buy her groceries, and she'd tell me a little bit about this old building. And one sad thing about it is if we would shoot it from the front, it looks pretty bad because we have had to put the front on 3 or 4 different kinds, but it seems like Mother Nature won't cooperate. And every time we get one of those strong western winds, off goes the front. So right now it's off, but inside this building's real interesting. A lot of the front part of it is all built with square nails. So Ella Kenton was telling me about a lot of even maybe in the early days of Roseman, they even had a few meetings in this old building. And when we moved it out here, we moved this probably in the middle 1860s. We found a lot of the old post office records. And some of the things that was interesting was that a lot of the mail that came into Roseman was shipped from the town of Tropico. And in case you don't know, Tropico used to be near Glendale. It was a larger town in Glendale, and when you left Los Angeles, if you look at the old early road maps, you'd see Tropico. And the men that eventually came up here and worked the mine, bought it from Ezra Hamilton, they named the mine Tropico at their little town down there. So this old building that's behind us here, like all these old buildings, if it could tell us, it'd tell you a lot of tall tales. Going back to that last building where Chad and I just shot, these old buildings have been used in a lot of television series, but one thing I remember about this one, the old Ritter building, they were shooting an FBI show here. It was a series with Efren Zimbalist Jr. And John McIntyre, who had a series of his own for a long time called Wagon Train, was in this FBI series. In fact, he was the villain, which seemed unusual because he's such an easy, nice-going guy. But this was John McIntyre's home in the FBI show. And one thing was interesting, his son was also in this series they shot here. John, every time he was more interested, he never took any time off because anytime his son came before the camera, he had to be out there and see how his son was doing. But again, these old buildings all around us here, if they could just talk to us, they could tell a lot of interesting stories. Is my mic on? I want to tell you a little bit more about this building. This building, Jed and I just filmed the old the Stuckey, Kent, and Duntley building. One little story I forgot to tell you. Rowley Duntley, when he sold his Oak Creek Ranch up there back of Willow Springs in the mountains over near closer to Tatchby, he was the last one to live in this building. And when he died, it was abandoned then. But the one thing we all remembered about it, it was a pretty old building, it looked pretty dilapidated. It never was a real classy building, but when Rowley moved into it, he built a nice new big metal garage for his Cadillac alongside of it with an electric door and everything. And everyone in Roseland used to laugh. They didn't think that garage and this old building were compatible. Anyway, Rowley liked it, so he was the last one to live in that old building. And his family gave it to us, and Louis Zaravika moved it out here. Now tell me when you're ready for this one. This old building that we're in front of, well, we're at, I don't know, you'd say we're the front of it or side of it or somewhere. It was in Lancaster on about a block north of what is now Lancaster Boulevard in about Date Street. And Rowley Duntley told me that they were going to tear it down. He said we should have this because it's one of Lancaster's old residential buildings. Probably built in the late 80s or 90s, Rowley thought. And he said there's a family named Basler, B-A-Z-L-E-R, that lived in it, so they always call it the Basler building. But when I was growing up in Lancaster, the Bob Cameron, who owned the Ledger Gazette, was living in it. And when the Rowley told us they were going to tear it down, we got a hold of the Bob Cameron family. They were living up in Northern California. And they said, yeah, we could have it. So again, Louis Zaravika moved this up here. And we fixed it up as a living, like a residential house. We had a lot of old furniture and things in it. One thing I remember that Barbara Rouse, who's a good friend of mine, got one of the old beds out that was in there and fixed it up when we closed down, and I think still using it. We had a lot of interesting old furniture in it. But the one thing that's interesting about this old building, Jed, later on we'll have to have you go in there, the building contractors really like this old building because when you go in, the partitions, you'll notice they're new 2x4s. It's a very unusual construction. That was one thing that they were always interested in. And when we had this old building for the museum, we had a lot of the front part glassed in with old window frames and whatnot and shelves. And we had our bottle collection in there, so the sun rays would hit the bottles and turn them purple. As you probably know, up until 1914, about the time World War I broke out, they used manganese in the glass materials, and the sun rays would turn them purple. But during World War I, there was a shortage of manganese, so they quit using that material in the glass. And so that's the way you can date a lot of the old bottles, because before about 1914, the sun rays would turn them purple, and after that, they wouldn't turn because they had different material in them. But we had a large bottle collection all across the front, and that's the reason all those old glass windows are in there. But again, this old building was, according to Rowley, was one of Lancaster's early residential buildings. But anyway, getting back to this old building here, the old Munn's house, as we call it, it's one of the most interesting buildings we have here in Gold Camp, because it was the Kern Antelope Historical Society from about 1960 to 1980 for 20 years. But first I'll give you a little background on this building. Eli Munn and his brother John and his sister Ingeborg all lived in it, and they were all here when we had the dedication for the Historical Society Museum. In fact, I think Chad and I have a tape of that event, and they all told a lot of history about it. And they said originally this building was built near where Plant 42 is now. I was on the ranch out there. And Eli Munns moved it. He took it down board by board, marked each board, moved it to Leona Valley, and raised a large family in it. And then after his family was arranged, they decided to do away with it. So we moved it up here again. Louis Zerbeker moved it for us probably in the 1960s. But one thing that's interesting, they would tell me about it, this corner right up behind here, one time was used as a post office for that area. And when you go inside a little later on, and then it has an upper story. And you go up that stairs, and you wonder how anyone lived upstairs because you can't even stand up there. But Eli Munns raised a large family in this building anyway, and they had a lot of good stories. The historical side, when they had the museum here, all the members and different ones gathered things to be displayed. We had a lot of glass showcases and had it kind of screened off so we used things on the wall. And the Old Timers Association of Antelope Valley, which meets the second Sunday of every October, had a real large collection of old photos, which they loaned us to display here. And then every year they'd have them on display at the Old Timers thing. Well, when we closed down, Frank Lane picked them up for the Old Timers Association, and now we don't see him there at the Old Timers anymore, but I understand Frank Lane gave them to the West Side Historical Society, and Milt Stark does bring a few of them to the Old Timer thing each year, but they have the Old Timers photo collection, which we used to display in here. We had fixed up one room, a little living room. Kitchen still had the old wooden cooking stove in it. And it had a lot of the old original furniture in it. One thing that's interesting about this building, it's been changed a little bit. You notice the ramp going down over there. As I said before, they used a lot of these old buildings and filming TV series here. And there was a TV series called Doc Elliott. James Franciscus was a country doctor in Colorado, and they shot a show here. And then this film, this part they shot here, one of the miners was living in here, and they had a big cave in at the mine, so the cameras were all set up here showing the people rocking on the porch, and they heard the sirens going off the mine. They got all excited and started running up the mine. And in that certain show they shot here, Merle Haggard, the country western singer, was in it, and he was supposed to have lost a leg, and they had to amputate. Franciscus, Dr. Elliott, had to amputate his leg up there in the mine. So I remember that series. Also, Doreen, my wife, was in that one. She was one of the miners' wives. But this building has a lot of history because it's been moved from Plant 42 to Leona Valley, and then from Louis Zerbeker to here. So anyway, one of these days, as they start some of these old buildings at the new fairground, they're talking about moving this one and the old section house, the one I was born in, and the superintendent's house, and maybe the Badler house, to make quite a little group of old buildings for the new fairground. We'll hopefully do it. There's a couple little things here that not directly associated with this building, but this old Studebaker, Jed will probably take a few pictures of it later on, wagon was used when they were building aqueduct. And the wooden wheels to drive it off. But Munns gave that to me. And you'll notice on the side, you can see the name Studebaker. Another old item over here is a Noel almond sheller, which the Godey family gave to us. And you can see it, the big old piece of equipment. Chad will probably get a few pictures of it later. But it looks like a lot of machinery just to shell almonds. Anything you think of, Jed?
When you answer.
Yeah, we can hear you.
There, I gotta get mine out. It's bad. I wish I were younger and had several $1,000,000 and could have invested years ago in keeping that going. It's fabulous. It's just, there's so much history out there. Are there any questions? Well, again, Jed, thank you so much. It's due to his videoing that we have this information, that we have the information from Ruth Russell. He interviewed several other people and he was good enough to give us the VHS tapes, which we then have converted to DVDs. All right, so without, I guess, further ado, excuse me. Thank you, Siobhan. I knew there was something, yes. The book that Glenn mentioned is this book, which he did a lot of the gathering of information for, and we do have it for sale. So.
And anybody that would like to volunteer for the Old Timers Barbecue, Shar said.
Oh, okay, yes. We would like to participate in the Old Timers Barbecue in October. Second weekend in October. For several years, there's just been a few of us that have done it. If anyone would like to volunteer, to help out, to come up with ideas, we did not do it last year. The year before, I had a video about mining on Soledad, and I talked a lot about mining and had that as the theme of our table. But we'd like to have a presence at the Old Timers Barbecue. So if anyone has ideas, would like to help us out, we are certainly open. Anything else I have forgotten?
Gretchen?
Yes.
The
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Shar brought some information. She has pictures from the chili.
Yeah, chili cook-offs.
The chili cook-off.
77, 78, those years.
Yeah, because they were out at the gold camp.
And she was Miss Roseman at the time.
Yes.
So she had
And Char,
Oh, there you
yeah,
go.
was anything else I have forgotten?
You want one?
Well, again, I'll remind you, if you haven't paid your dues, we would love to have you as a real member. You don't have to be a member to come to our meetings, but it certainly helps support us if you are. So again, thank you very much for coming. And Siobhan, do we have clues about our next meeting? There'll be no meeting in July, no meeting in August, but in September,
We'll be starting back up. To be continued.
yeah, come over here so the mic.
Where are you? Right.
I'm all over.
Alrighty. That is one of the advantages of being a member, is that you get the newsletter a week and a half early. I have yet to figure out the Facebook algorithm, and so I have found that if I post something a week ahead, it floats to the bottom and it disappears. So I've been trying to post the day or two before, and then I'm getting, well, how come you posted so late? Well, become a member, and you'll be in the know sooner. Also, just as we're doing these kinds of things, feel free to reach out with us and go, you know, this is a story that we'd like for you to pursue. Shakedown, Johnny May, he's got a story, nail him down, get them to come up here and share, because it is only with the influence of Jed Dyke, John and Gail, that Gretchen, that these stories are being preserved. And you look back on it and we become so used to this is our life, this is our world, and we don't think that it has relevance until it's gone. So please think about it and go, gee, we'd really like to have you interview this person. We'd like for you to dig into this story, and we would be really, really happy to pursue it.
Just a suggestion with the notice that Willow Springs Raceway is being sold.
Yes.
That would be a really good history to preserve.
We did interview Chris.
Stephanie is still around.
Yes. We did.
Yeah, we do have information on Willow Springs.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that is okay, in my opinion, is to say, during this time, there was a very colorful, rich history, and we don't have to cleanse all the history. It's okay.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. For me, I like a good story. I like to look in someone's dirty clothes hamper and go, oh, this is pretty interesting. And if they tell it, I feel like it's pretty public fair game. You know, I won't go look in your dirty clothes hamper without your permission, but you know, those stories are rich and they're interesting and they're entertaining. If you just want the facts of a story, go read the sign. You know, they'll give it to you in 3 sentences or less. So, yes, we like colorful history. Pancho Barnes being a good one who we've gotten lots of.
And
Janet?
with all the important history that was in there too, one thing that just stood out was when he told a story about the coal, and the kid said, why don't you just flip the switch? I mean, that says so much about history too, that you gotta record those things.
Yes,
That's right.
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Anything else? Well, again, thank you all very much. We hope to see all of you in September.
I will tell one quick nasty
Oh.
story here, just because I can't help myself.
All right.
I had forgotten that we were not supposed to be selling books tonight. And you notice I'm leaning really close up to Gretchen. And Gretchen sends me a little email this morning. And she said, Siobhan, we're not selling any boobs tonight. So I want you to know we do not have any boobs, but we do have some books.
I didn't know better. Check my emails better. Thank you all for coming.
Auto-completed.